Hello everyone, we are Group D, a research team consisting of Xi, Suijia, Ewan, Jiaxing, and Chen, and this video is part of Australian National Department of Young Scholarly. We have prepared an analytical guide to Singapore to help future Australian companies doing business with Singapore. Each team member will present their perspective on different aspects of Singapore to accomplish the goal. And this is our outline. Singapore is a prosperous island nation as one of the four Asian tiger. Singapore draws a significant amount of international investment, making it one of the top nations of doing business. Next, Xi will discuss the impact of globalization on Singapore's political, economic, and the impact of its goal system of Australian companies. Globalization has had a defined impact on Singapore political economy. The definition of globalization is very flexible and its contemporary times. Globalization is defined as the strengthening of transnational interaction that promotes the creation of transnational structures and a global interaction of culture, economic, political, technological, and social process. With the development of globalization, the Singaporean people have to come value freedom and democracy, which has also influenced the political economy of Singapore. The PAP has actively incorporated democratic and competitive features in governance, including rotation of power, people's representation, majority voting, and freedom of information to emulate the dictatorship and create a more democratic and healthy political election system. Furthermore, globalization has led to prevalence of consumerism among Singaporean people. The more prosperous Singapore is, the more Singaporean people want more than just economic growth. In response, the Singaporean government has developed the concept of shared value, the national ideology based on Asian value, which emphasizes the importance of group to the individual and the importance of consensus in the group. Shared values also emerge, counters the pressure of the over-democratization of the country and to move Singapore towards a more democratic society based on the rule of law. Furthermore, in terms of Singapore, the economic system, globalization has led the Singapore government to gradually give up its control over business boundaries, allowing business to compete freely, promoting the sense of middle classes and reducing income inequality. Therefore, promoting economic growth in terms of market share, business prosperity requires peace and political stability. So business interests are strengthened, and the business interests will demand more democracy to attract more investors. An overly democratic society is detrimental to the interests of Singapore citizens. And the dependence of the Singapore's economy of foreign capital can also be affected by changing economic situation in the world. Challenge of Singapore legal system for Australian companies established in Singapore. An Australian company established in Singapore is a multinational enterprise. In Singapore, as in other countries, there are certain legal provision governing multinational enterprise. In addition to paying custom and excise duties on imported goods, the Singaporean government also restricts the import of certain goods, such as the agricultural product, and some product even require special permits. While foreign workers are welcome in Singapore, there are strict government regulation and restriction on employment of foreign workers. Companies must provide foreign workers with value work document with all foreign workers must carry valid work document with them for inspection by government official. This made it more difficult to bring the talents from abroad. Furthermore, Singapore human resources have recently shown a shortage. According to the reported by the Acclaim 2021, 54% of the jobs are still vacant due to labor shortage caused by the resident dissatisfaction with the higher cost of living caused by the expired rates. These are challenges that need to be overcome for Australian companies setting up in Singapore. And Suijia will show her opinion.
Hi, I'm Suijia Yang, and you can call me Alina. Today, I'm going to talk about my question. Using relevant concepts and measures, analyze the level of both economic development and human development in Singapore, and which measure of either economic or human development of greatest importance to an Australia firm. And considering establish a presence in Singapore, justify your choice with reference to the different measures. And here is my contents today. I will talk about which one is more important and define economic development and human development. And I will talk about the Singapore economy and Singapore Human Development Index, and then evaluate the Australia company set in Singapore. In my view, I think economic development is more important than human development for Australia firm who set in the Singapore. I'm going to define economic development first. According to Esteva, economic development is the process of changing the transforms a low-income country into a model industry economy and often describe a country's economic change and social transformation. Singapore has experienced rapid economic transformation over the past few decades, with an average annual GDP growth rate of 8% between 1956 and 2006. It's set from steady 2010. Singapore currently specializes in high-value manufacturing activities, and it is highly competitive economy. Furthermore, with the world's second highest GDP per capita based on purchasing power, Singapore is a highly free market economy. Its economy is based on demand and supply, and it is largely free from government control. Thirdly, Singapore is a low-tax country and has a reputation as tax haven, which means the international business or individual enterprise can pay less tax and make higher profit by setting up business in Singapore. Fourthly, easy to set up business in Singapore has constantly been selected as the easiest country in the world to do business, and the data is from World Bank's annual Doing Business report. In particular, Singapore scores highly in areas important to entrepreneurs and startups, such as access to capital and credit, and how to address insolvency issues effectively. And it is also the only country in Asia to have received a 3A credit rating from all three global agents. And human development. Human development from Al-Khari 2010. Human development refers to physical, cognitive, and psychosocial development of human beings throughout life, expanding people's choice. The basic goal of human development is to create and provide a good environment for people to live long, healthy, and creative lives. Firstly, according to the Human Development Report in 2020, as shown as figure 1, we can see that Singapore Development Index has been about 0.939 in 2020, which means that Singapore's HDI has been very high. Singapore is well above world's HDI. The HDI is based on a combination of longevity, healthy living, educational attainment, and standing of life. Secondly, according to the Human Development Report 2020, life expectancy in Singapore is already 83.6 years in 2020, which is about 12 years higher than the world life expectancy, which means that Singapore is doing very well in terms of welfare and facilities. The number of years of education is also high in 30 years, meaning that Singapore has a high school education per capita, compared to 8.6 years of education per capita in the world. So Singapore is generally well educated and has a good human environment to live in. If an Australian organization wants to do business in Singapore, it needs to assess Singapore's economy and human development. Firstly, in terms of economic development factors, companies can enjoy low tax rate, easy to set up a business, low government involvement, and high GDP per capita. Low tax rate means business will be taxed much less than in other countries and can strive for higher profit. Low government involvement allows business to be freer and treat more widely, contributing to higher productivity and job growth. A high GDP per capita in Singapore means higher income for the population and a higher purchasing power for the company products. In terms of human development, companies can access high life expectancies and educational attainment. High life expectancy indicates that people in Singapore are healthy and do not need to worry about the risk, such as the death of employment. A good level of education means that a large skilled workforce in the community, which save times, costs for the company, and they are good for the company to set up. So in conclusion, for Australia organizations based on Singapore, Singapore's economic development is better for the company. That's all about today. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Wang Yiwen. I present to you that cultural distance between Singapore and Australia and the changes that are taking place in cultures of these two countries. Firstly, I will introduce the cultural difference between Singapore and Australia through the data in Halstead's cultural dimension theory, which is divided into 6 dimensions, and the scores are calculated from 1 to 120, with 1 being the lowest score and 120 being the highest score. The first dimension is power distance. This dimension reflects the level of expectation and the tolerance of inequality and the power among the less powerful members of society. In the bar chart, we can see that Australia's score is 38. This score is very low, which means that the Australia culture encourage a flat hierarchical structure. So the working relationship between sparers and subordinates in Australia government or company is equal. When working, subordinates are given important tasks, and if there is mistake in the work, sparers and subordinates are jointly responsible. This shows that in Australia, cultural rights are spread to everyone and should not be reserved for 4 people. On the other hand, Singapore has a highest score of 74, which shows that in Singapore cultural people accept inequality and disparity of power, and that power is concentrated in 4 people. And the bureaucracy is more prominent. In Singaporean organization, subordinates are not given very important tasks and are clearly told by their superiors how to complete the tasks. When mistakes are made, only the subordinates are held responsible in most cases. The second dimension is uncertainty avoidance, which refers to the degree to which people feel comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, and refer to the degree to which people seek truth. Australia scored 51 on this dimension, which is a medium score. This represents that the Australia culture expect people to have stable life and be disciplined. On the other hand, Singapore scored 8, which is an extremely low score. This means that Singapore culture is very lax about making rules and lacks risk and sees it as part of innovation and breaks rules. The third dimension is individualism and collectivism. This dimension refers to extent to which individual goals are higher than collective goals. On this dimension, Australia scored 90, meaning that Australia culture believes that people will focus on achieving their individual goals and make decisions based on their own personal needs. For example, in the family, people are more inclined to take care of only themselves and their immediate family. At work, people are expected to take the initiative to demonstrate their ability to and self-reliance. On the other hand, Singapore scored 20, which indicates that Singaporean culture believes that family or organization goals are higher than individual goals, and that individual decisions are made based on what is good for community or the team. The above 3 dimensions are most difference between Australia and Singapore. Next, I will introduce the changes that are taking place in the culture of these 2 countries. There is no doubt that the culture of these 2 countries are becoming more similar with the advancement of technology, especially the internet and transportation. The cultural convergence between 2 countries is becoming more and more common. For example, in terms of ideology, certain Confucian colleges have been opened in Australia, and the Singaporean traditional Confucianism has been widely spread in Australia. This cultural convergence has led to many negative outcomes. Some countries has long dominated the dissemination of culture, and usually the stronger the economic, the stronger the cultural export. In the long run, cultural difference will be reduced and the richness of world culture will be lost. It may be even happen that bad culture of the strong countries will not be rejected in the spreading process. So the country should strengthen education in order to make people have the ability to distinguish right from wrong, instead of just abandoning cultural import. Thank you.
Now, I will introduce industries that Singapore need to be focused on when trading with other countries and determine which theory Singapore should follow when trading based on Adam Smith and David Ricardo theory. Firstly, the concept of absolute advantage was introduced by the economics Adam Smith, which means that a country has an absolute advantage over another country in the production of a product if it produces more of that product with 1 unit of resources. A country has an absolute advantage because it has certain factors of production, such as fertile farmland, favorable weather conditions. According to the theory, Singapore is considered to be one of the most maritime and air transport centers in the world due to its prime location. Singapore's container ports are among the busiest in the world. They offer 200 shipping routes to choose from with connection to 600 ports in 123 countries. This is why the logistics industry is a definite advantage for Singapore. Ranking as Asia's top logistics hub by the World Bank for 10 consecutive years, Singapore provides world-class connectivity to the region and beyond. Additionally, the updated Logistics ITM 2025 was introduced in 2022 with the goal of establishing Singapore as a prime logistic hub in Asia, where business may develop cutting-edge skills to keep the world's commodities flowing. Now, I'd like to move on to the comparative advantage. David Ricardo proposed the theory of comparative advantage trade in his masterpiece, Principles of Political Economy and Transaction. Comparative advantage is the act of one producer producing a good at lower opportunity cost of another producer. When countries focus on producing goods with the lowest opportunity cost compared to the other countries, they gain an international trade advantage. Singapore, at the forefront of developed countries in the world, is the third largest international financial center in the world after New York and London, and the #1 financial center in Asia. Firstly, Singapore's advantage over other countries in financial can be directly attributed to 2 reasons. In terms of the illegal system and regulatory agency, Singapore has well-developed financial laws and a unique regulatory agency. MAS performs regulatory functions for all financial institutions and companies licensed to provide capital market service in Singapore, and its scope of regulation covers not only some of the current scope of regulation in China, but also the regulation of wealth management, credit rating, and so on. In terms of geographical location, Singapore is an island nation located in Southeast Asia, which means London as its financial transaction for the day, and New York has not yet started its financial transaction. It is the time when Singapore can conduct financial transaction, which helps Singapore's financial transactions to make up for the weaknesses in London, New York financial transaction. Secondly, it is in the Straits of Malacca, where the international flow of goods, information, and capital interchange, transit and distribution, and so on. Its superior geographical environment and the government's strong regulation of the financial industry and a comprehensive financial legal system make the country's financial industry opportunity cost greatly reduced. The above reasons constitute the financial industry is Singapore's comparative advantage. To sum up, if we follow Adam Smith's theory of absolute advantage, then Singapore should focus on developing the logistic industry in trade. However, this is not an advantage. For example, the impact of COVID-19 on various industries around the world was so great that many countries reduced transportation and logistics during the epidemic, which hit the logistic industry so hard that the country's economy is likely to fall off and have a hard time recovering. Even if the country focuses on logistics in trade, it is not possible to transport everything because the country has limited resources and energy. Therefore, I believe that Singapore should follow David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage in trade. When conducting international trade, Singapore should focus on the financial sector because this industry has the highest productivity, which means its opportunity cost is low and it can maximize benefit in trade. So that is what I want to share. Thank you.
Now let me explain the fifth question, and then I will explain what trade policy instruments that Singapore's government currently employ and which theory of international trade does this use of trade policy instruments support. Trade enables countries to specialize in the production of goods and services that match their comparative advantages. It also enables consumers and producers to access a wider range of products at lower prices. Foreign trade policy refers to the norms of import and export trade activities formulated by a government in a certain period of time, according to its own political and economic interests and development goals. Singapore maintains one of the world's freest trading regions, with no restrictions foreign ownership except for national security reasons and in areas such as air transport, utilities, newspaper publishing, and shipping. We are familiar with the tools of national trade policy. First, we all know tariffs, including import taxes, export taxes, transit taxes, and so on. And we know quotas. Quotas can be divided into import quotas and export quotas. There are also exchange controls and non-tariff barriers. Singapore pursues an open trade policy, hopes to establish a free and open international trade environment, and actively engaging in bilateral trade negotiations. Referring to trade theory, we can think of mechanism reflected in Singapore's trade. Singapore implements mechanism, encourage free trade, encourage commodity exports, encourages the development of high-tech industry and high-end manufacturing, and implements industry policies. Every year, Singapore invests a large amount of funds to support industry development and is committed to developing high-end service industries. Singapore has a very developed tertiary industry. According to the bar chart of Singapore's tax rate from 1995 to 2020, it can be seen that around 2019, Singapore tax rate reached an unprecedented high in recent years. This is undoubtedly influenced by the COVID-19. Trade is one of the trade tools. If trade is raised, export will be inhibited and domestic market supply will be increased, which can inhibit commodity prices to a certain extent. Trade between Australia and Singapore is very close. Australia signed the Singapore-Australia Free Trade Agreement, we know as SAFTA, with Singapore in 2003. And SAFTA removes remaining Singapore chips and provides Australian business with cheaper inputs on a range of products. The Singapore-Australia Free Trade Agreement is a wide-ranging and comprehensive agreement under which import duties on all goods originating in Australia and Singapore are removed. As one of the most business-friendly, resilient, and stable economies in the world, Singapore's favorable and stable tax policies have provided a strong driving force for attracting foreign investment and developing the economy. For example, there is no capital gains tax or dividend tax in Singapore. There are more than 80 tax agreements to avoid double taxation, and there are headquarter tax incentive schemes for multinational companies to set up the headquarters and fund to enjoy tax expansion schemes. The Singapore government's recently released budget for the 2022 fiscal year includes a major overhaul of the tax system. The consumption tax will be increased to 8% from the beginning of 2023. In addition, individual income tax, real estate tax, and additional registration fees for luxury cars will be increased to implement a fairer tax system. So the rich companies more taxes and shoulders more social responsibilities. The aim to fairly and positively provide the governments with a more sustainable source of revenue and ease the government's increasing pressure on public spending, such as healthy care. The move is an effort to reduce inequality in the post-pandemic era of increasing uncertainty. This is end of our presentation. We've gone from our initial analysis of Singapore economic in terms of globalization to explanation that economic development will be more important than human development for Australian companies established in Singapore. Now we talk about the cultural distance between Singapore and Australia by comparing absolute advantage and comparative advantages. It is finally determined that comparative advantages is used to identify and explain the industry that Singapore should focus on is its trade. Finally, we talk about the instruments of trade used in Singapore as discussed, as well as the integration with trade theory. Thanks my team members for our cooperation in the team activities, and thank you for listening.